Hi guys, thanks for coming to my channel. I'm so happy you're here. I'm going to start something new today, so I really hope that you like it. I am one of those people that have fallen down the Bailey Sarian wormhole, and I absolutely love her murder mystery and makeup. I also really love Robert Welsh and his ghost stories and makeup. So my new series is going to be somewhat along those lines, but it's going to be a little bit more cosmic. In this series, I am going to be doing my makeup and getting ready, and I'm going to talk about aliens, alien abductions, UFOs, all that fun jazz. So if it sounds like something you might be interested in, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. Hi, Future Heather here. I am editing this and neglected to mention that I already shot this entire video once and left my fan on so you could hear it the entire time. And this time around, I left the AC unit on in the room that I was filming in so you can hear it the entire time. So I do apologize for the horrible audio quality, but I am not refilming it for a third attempt. Hopefully I'll remember, leave myself a sticky note or something, not to leave my AC or my fan on in the future. But yeah, so I won't be talking about every product that I use, but I will leave a list of products in the description below, just in case you're curious about what I'm using on my face. So let's start this story off with a bang, and I don't mean the big bang, but we are going to talk about one of the most well-known sightings of UFOs, abductions, pretty much all of anything alien, like wrapped up into one. This is going to be a collection of accounts, so more than one person's story. So bear with me because there are going to be a lot of names. And for some reason, a lot of the people are all named Tom. So all of these people that we're going to talk about all have different accounts of what happened to them or what they witnessed on September 1st, 1969 in Berkshire County, Massachusetts. The first ones we're going to talk about are Nancy and Tom Reed. They owned the Village Green restaurant in Sheffield, Massachusetts. Nancy, the mom, her mother, and Nancy's two sons, Tom and Matthew. Tom was 10 at the time. I don't know how old Matthew was, but they were in a horse riding tournament the day of September 1st. And after a long day of riding, they decided to stop at the restaurant to get something to eat. So at about 9 o'clock at night, Nancy, Grandma, and Nancy's two sons decided to head home. And because it was so late, they decided they were going to take a shortcut. And they were going to take the Sheffield Bridge. Now this bridge was one of those old style covered bridges, and as they're driving home, Grandma is just kind of looking out the window, you know, she's in the passenger seat, and she notices this bright light that seems to be rising from the banks of the river. As they exited the bridge, Nancy says that in front of them there was this huge ball of light that began shooting beams out of it to the ground, and this light hovered about 30 feet in the air, so about 2 stories up. Everybody else in the car, of course, was in shock and awe about what was happening and what they were seeing, but Matthew, the little brother, for some reason is looking out the window to the side instead of at this light straight on, and notices a second light, and this one would be described as rolling. similar to a wave. Nancy remembers that when they stopped the car and turned it off, it was very strange because there was no sound. There were no animals, there were no bugs chirping, anything. And she found that very odd because, I mean, out in the middle of the country in the summer, you're bound to hear something. And there was nothing. And Tom says the air pressure changed dramatically. It felt as if you were swimming underwater. Then Nancy describes this huge disc-shaped object that is right in front of them where the light was coming from, and she describes it as being similar in shape to a turtle shell. So if you were to turn a turtle on its side, it looked somewhat like that. Then Tom would go on to say that as soon as they saw this object, the car lit up. He said it was as if it was the middle of the day. It was so bright you could see all the dust in the car. You could see all of the buttons on the radio. You could see all of the hair on everybody's head. It was just blinding. It was so bright. And the same moment that this light turned on, all of the noise in the forest just erupted. There were birds and crickets and like all manner of wildlife just making a huge racket. And then nothing. That's it. The next thing that any of them can remember, they are waking up in the car 2 miles down the road in front of the local drugstore. But Mom, Nancy, is no longer in the driver's seat. She is in the passenger seat. And Grandma is now in the driver's seat. And Tom would say Grandma never drove. She just was one of those ones that didn't like to drive, didn't really know how to drive, so she never drove. But when they woke up, Grandma was in the driver's seat and Mom was in the passenger seat. And when they think about this experience, Tom recalls this entire scenario happening in the span of about 15 minutes. But in reality, they were gone for over 3 hours. So at this same time, about 5 miles away, Melanie Kurdofer, I'm not sure if I said her name correctly, and I do apologize if I did not, but Melanie was 12 years old, and she was out with her family. It was Melanie, her mother and father, and her sister, and they had gone to the Dairy Queen in town to get some ice cream, and then they decided that they were going to drive out to Lake Mansfield and eat their ice cream and spend some time together as a family. And as they were parking at the lake, all of a sudden in front of their car or their truck, this bright light appeared in the sky. And of course the family was kind of confused. They didn't know what it was. And Melanie immediately got this deep feeling of terror. And the mom kept saying it must be some kind of shooting star. So the dad, being the curious cat that he was, kept saying, let's go get it. Let's go see what it is. Let's go figure this out. Melanie is in the back seat crying, like pleading with her dad, please leave it alone. Like, let's just stay here and eat our ice cream. But good old daddy, he decides he is chasing this thing. He wants to know what it is. So they take off after it. That is the last thing that Melanie's little sister remembers. She doesn't remember anything after Dad kicking it into high gear. Melanie, on the other hand, remembers chasing this thing, and then she remembers levitating in the air. And after that, she remembers being in some sort of a ship in a room filled with lots of children in it, she says. But all of these children just would disappear one at a time. One by one by one, they just are gone. And the next thing she knows, she's waking up back at the lake, but she's all alone. She's all by herself. Her parents are gone, so she has to walk home by herself. Now, I don't know about anybody else, but if my parents just up and left me at the lake with this crazy light thing happening, I would be outraged. I would be so mad. So she goes home, and that is really the end of her account. Now, again, at the same time as Melanie and Tom's story are happening, on September 1st, down the road, another 4 or 5 miles, I think it was, there is a little boy named Tom Warner. Now, Tom was 10 at the time, and he is the youngest of 7 kids. I feel his pain. I'm the oldest of 10, so I know the whole big family thing. Now, Tom and his family have lived in the same house in Massachusetts since 1835. He still currently lives there with his kids and his wife and his family. But on that particular night, Tom was at the neighbor's house coloring with Jane and Debbie Shaw. And as they were coloring, Tom all of a sudden heard this voice in his head. Again, I would be like, oh no, not happening. But he heard this voice in his head that said, you need to go home now. So, like any normal person probably would do, Tom took off. He was like, oh heck no, I'm out. Bye guys. And he left. And he went home. He started running across the yard or the field at their home towards his house, and he was so scared that he was running as fast as he possibly could. Now, Jane would go on to say that she watched him run out. Her and Debbie were in shock, like, what's going on? Why is he just up and leaving like a bat out of hell? And they watched him run out into the yard, and about halfway through, he just kind of stopped. He was still running, but he was running in place. He wasn't going anywhere. Jane says that after a few minutes of him running in place, this bright light came down all around him, and then he just disappeared. And of course, her and Debbie decided that they were going to go look for him, right? I mean, wouldn't you go look for your friend that just like ran out like crazy and then disappeared in the middle of your yard? So they go out and they are looking for Tom, and they can't find him anywhere. Tom says he remembers running out the door and running towards home, and he remembers running as fast as he possibly could, but not getting anywhere. He then remembers this huge UFO drop out of the sky in front of him, and then this beam of light being all around him, and this beam felt like it knocked the wind out of him. Then the next thing he remembers is being in a room, and he doesn't remember much. He then remembers Melanie, which he didn't know who she was at the time, but he says he remembers this little girl and how scared she was, and the look in her eyes was just like the most fear you've ever seen in somebody. Years later, when Melanie and Tom did meet, Melanie would describe their meeting as if they already knew each other. they were family, like they were brother and sister, and they had known each other their whole lives. But Tom says that that night, he then remembers being laid back down in the field of his property on the other side of the property from where he disappeared, and this light kind of gradually lowered him to the ground. While this light was on him, he couldn't move. He tried to get up and run away, and this light was just holding him down and holding him still, and the voice came back into his head and told him, "I'll be done in a minute." And a minute later, the light was gone, and he got up and turned around just in time to see this UFO disappear. Now, Jane reports that the time from Tom disappearing in one part of the yard and reappearing in another part of the yard was 7 minutes of time that he was gone. Now, I don't know about you guys, but that one kind of freaked me out the most. I'm not gonna lie, because that was one of the only ones that claimed of being spoken to by the other beings. How they know what English is, I don't know, but I mean, it's an alien race. They can know anything, right? Right? But now we're going to jump over to Jane Green and her story of September 1st, 1969. That night, she was traveling home from Stockbridge to Great Barrington, Massachusetts, and she was with her friend Mary DeGrace, who since has passed away, so we don't get her story of all this. But Nancy and Mary were traveling home together, and in the distance, they see these bright lights. And at first, they thought all these bright lights that appeared are from an accident. Oh no. They think all these lights are from an accident, and it's like the cop cars, right? And so they slow down a little bit. As they get closer and closer, they notice this light getting brighter and brighter and brighter, and it gets so bright that they can't see. So Jane pulls over and she gets out of the car, and they are looking at this bright light, and this thing appeared in the sky and was so big she couldn't see the end of it. So she said if you turned your head from side to side, you couldn't find the edges of it. It was that big. Then as they are looking at it, this thing goes up and then over and then up again, and it just disappears over the top of the mountain. Jane and Mary are obviously in a little bit of shock at what they had just seen, so they carefully drive home, and Jane drops Mary off at her house and goes home and tells her husband what had happened. Now, her husband believes her, but they agree not to tell the kids. They don't want to scare them. But years later, Jane would find out that the kids knew because they had seen the same thing, but Grandma had told them not to tell Mom. Don't tell Mom on me that aliens came to our doorstep while I was watching you. You know, typical Grandma stuff. Nothing out of the ordinary there, right? But Jane's husband says, let's not tell the kids. I believe you. Let's go tell the radio. You know, this was back in the day before social media, so there wasn't like, oh, let's post it on Facebook, you know. It was simpler times. They go over to the local radio station where Tom where Tom J is the DJ, and they tell him her story, but he doesn't believe her until his ham radio starts going crazy with all of these people saying, you know, did you see that? Like, please tell me I'm not the only one that saw this giant light, and all the same things that Mary just said. So then he believes her. He has since passed away, so we can't get his side of the story, but all of these people saw these strange lights in the sky. But there are dozens, if not hundreds of people who have never met each other. Some of them still to this day have never met each other, that all report very similar experiences happening on the night of September 1st, 1969 in the, oh my God, I f***ed that one up, didn't I, Heather? Even with all of these people's stories and all of these witnesses, somehow this never ended up in the newspaper or in any police reports. So there's no newspaper articles, no police reports, nothing. But there are a lot of people that report seeing something strange that night, and some of them even remember being abducted. All of these people came from different places in the county, some even into Connecticut, reporting the same things on the same night in the same general area of the country. So how are all these random people coming up with the same stories on the same night when they don't know each other if something didn't really happen? Could you imagine being part of something that big? So that's all of the stories that I've gathered for September 1st, 1969 from Berkshire County, Massachusetts, about abductions or the UFO sightings that happened that night. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure that you give it a big thumbs up down below so I know to keep making these. Please subscribe and hit that bell notification so you know every time that I post a new video and you don't miss anything. I just want to leave you with one more thing to think about. The universe is a really big place. Huge, right? So if it's just us, it seems like an awful waste of space, doesn't it? I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye.